Okay, welcome to today's webinar focused on discovering why being a disability confident organisation makes good business sense, and with a particular focus on recruiting and retaining diverse talent. During today's session, we'll delve into the benefits of putting disability confidence at the top of your organisation's agenda, and we'll also be learning some best practice examples from our great guest speakers. By the end of the session, you'll have a deeper understanding of the solutions required to create a truly inclusive working environment. So we're really excited to welcome our guest panelists, Paul Deemer, Head of Diversity and Inclusion at NHS Employers, our very own Louise McQuillan, Workplace Solutions Manager at TextHelp, and standing in at the last minute for Heather McVicar, we've got Kate Headley, who's the Director of the Clear Company. So I'll introduce the panelists in just a moment. First off, some housekeeping. So I'm Donna Thompson. I will be your host on behalf of TextHelp for today's session. Hopefully you're all connected to the webinar okay. You can hear my voice and you can see me and the panel on the webcam. And you can see the slides, of course. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the GoToWebinar software, you should see a little panel on the right-hand side of your screen that looks something like the one displayed on the slide now. You can control your audio settings in here, and as an attendee, you're on listen only mode, and that's just so that everyone attending can have a good listening experience. We do encourage you to ask questions though, so whether it's about the material being presented or you have a technical issue that you may experience, you can submit them to us at any time throughout the presentation using the questions section in the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll be monitoring the questions as we go along. So today's webinar will also be recorded, so we will share the recording and the slides with you early next week, hopefully. One last thing from me before we get started. If you'd like to talk about today's session, or if you think of any questions after the session has finished, you can reach us on the Twitter hashtag you can see on the slide now. So that's hashtag Disability Confident Webinar. So let's introduce today's panelists and get on with the show. Paul Deemer is Head of Diversity and Inclusion at NHS Employers. Paul has been an HR professional for over 30 years and has vast experience in recruitment, employee relations, employment law and diversity across government, health and voluntary sectors. I'd like to say hi.
Good afternoon, everybody. I know we've just gone past 12 o'clock. Really nice to be here today. Thank you.
Great. And we've got Kate Headley, who is the Director of the Clear Company and is a fully qualified HR professional who has followed an early career in the private sector and the public sector with 15 years experience in recruitment and diversity. She's best known for her passion and expertise in the development of inclusive recruitment. Would you like to say hi, Kate?
Hello, yes, I'm standing in for Heather, who's poorly, and I'm now full of colds, so clearly it's a thing at the Clear Company. Apologies.
Oh, that's grand. We can hear you perfectly fine though, Kate. That's great. And then we've got Louise McQuillan, who is Workplace Solutions Manager at TextHelp. She specialises in helping public and private sector organisations to support workforce diversity and inclusion strategies, increase staff productivity and customer engagement.
Hello everybody, looking forward to today.
Great, okay, so welcome everyone and thanks for taking part in today's Disability Confident webinar. Okay, so let's talk disability confidence. So before we dig into the disability confidence scheme, let's run a poll. Let's find out how many of our listeners' organisations have actually joined the scheme. So the question should have appeared on your screen now, and you can answer either yes, no, or not sure. So we'll just give you a second or two to answer. Just looking at gov.uk's last count, over 16,000 organisations had joined the scheme. So it'll be interesting to see how many of our listeners have signed up. So, okay, I think we can close that. Yeah. So 33% have joined, 50% no, and 17% not sure. So that's quite interesting. Hopefully by the end of today's session, all those who haven't yet joined will be a little bit more knowledgeable about the benefits of joining the scheme and how easy it is to sign up. So we'll just run one more poll and then we'll get started. So this time I'd like our listeners to take a guess at how many working age disabled people there are in the UK. So that's people aged between 16 and 65 years old. There are a number of options on your screen that you can choose between less than 1 million up to more than 9 million people. We're looking for the number of people between the ages of 16 to 64 in the UK with a disability. What have we got? Okay, so no one has said less than 1 million. We've got 40%, I think it's between 1 and 3, 30% think it's between 3 and 6, 20% between 6 and 9, and 10% think it's more than 9 million. So the answer actually is there are 8.1 million working age disabled people in the UK. That's over 19% of the working age population. Of course, many disabilities and illnesses are invisible. You can't see them, so you wouldn't necessarily know about them unless you were told. So let's learn what the Disability Confidence Scheme is and how it can help organisations to support employers to make the most of the talents disabled people can bring to the workplace. So Kate, if we can start maybe with you. So for those of our listeners who are not entirely familiar with the Disability Confidence Scheme, can you start off by telling us just what it is?
Yeah, sure. I had the privilege actually of being part of the development of this scheme, so I can give you quite a bit of information, hopefully. The scheme is a free, let's emphasise that, so it is a free resource available to all employers across the UK, developed by government, employers and representatives from the disabled community as well, to make a toolkit, an action plan and a programme of change that was accessible, took away the fear, removed some of those barriers and identified why this, 20% of the workforce we're failing to access in many cases is actually a short step away and a small tweak away from us being able to access that resource and maximise that potential in our organisations. It's built in a way that it suits the smaller organisation at the beginning of the journey and the large corporate who's flying and wants to be seen as having a leadership role. So step one is, all you have to do, click on the .gov website, which I'm sure you'll show the URL for, and sign up. When you sign up, you're basically saying, I'm committed to this. I really genuinely want to do something about becoming a disability confident employer, and I want to access the tools and resources that will help me to do it. And I'm going to do one thing over the next 12 months to try and prove that, that I can make that step change. And assuming that works, and it does for everybody, I think, then you can increase your level of engagement up to employer status. And this is where you really start to embed that disability confidence. You've raised the profile, you've raised awareness, you've accessed help, you've got yourself a nice network of other disability confident and would-be disability confident employers, and you're really on the journey. And you've got a literally step-by-step approach to recruitment and to retention, with all the resources that you would need in order to make those step changes. And those step changes can be specific to you. You don't have to do all of them. You select what's right for you. And then the final step is leadership, disability confident leader, which is only applicable if you've already achieved level 2, so you're a disability confident employer. And this is where you really are a shining light. So you're not only a disability confident employer in your own right, but you are influencing external to your organisation and sharing and spearheading that best practice, encouraging other organisations to get involved. I can't tell you how accessible it is. It's non-bureaucratic. It's really interesting to do. Our team love it. And I think the numbers speak for themselves. I think we had just about 6,500 employers with the original Disability Confidence Scheme from 1991 to 2015. And what have we got? 15,000 already now on the new scheme. So it's working, it's out there. Yeah.
Okay.
Don't check the stats, they're not my strength.
Yeah. Stats are updated so often, aren't they? Because more and more organisations are joining, which is great. So just to look at the Clear Company, why did the Clear Company want to be part of the scheme? You're a leader, isn't that right? Yeah,
we are a disability confident leader. We were one of the first. So we got our award from a minister in Westminster amid great ceremony, which was really exciting. We're very, very proud of that. Why did we get involved? Because I personally sat on behalf of Clear on a steering group with DWP, trying to look at why we weren't leveraging the engagement with employers. So great schemes and programmes coming out from government, but the level of engagement for employers was lacking and needed to be accelerated. And myself, amongst others, played a role in that. And the reason why we got actively involved as the Clear Company is we genuinely believe that we now have something that may not be perfect. It will continue to iterate as these things do, but it is genuinely providing practical tools and resources that you can measure and that we know and can emphatically say with our experience will make a difference. So we're proud to be part of it.
Great. And how has being disability confident made a difference to your organisation?
It's an interesting question when I saw that come up, because we were kind of there before the scheme, and we informed the scheme, but it does actually influence us going forward, because it keeps us on our game. So we, like everybody else, have got to reapply for our leader status this year, and we're perfectly comfortable doing that. It means that we have to examine what we're doing. But what it really does for us, being disability confident leader status, is it puts us in a position to influence externally. It's in everything we do. So whether we're doing a recruitment audit or training or whatever it is that we do, the disability confidence scheme is right at the front of it, as it is with my non-day job, which Paul supports me on, which is putting disability confidence through the recruitment industry. So what it's given us is the tools to make a difference.
Great. Okay. Just mentioning Paul. Paul, will bring you in at NHS Employers. You work with many organisations to help them become more disability confident. What was it about the scheme that sparked your interest?
I like the scheme for lots and lots of reasons, some of which Kate's already outlined. But just first of all, for any of you on Twitter at the moment, if you follow the text help hashtag or handle, or my own handle as well, which is at NHSE_Paul, I've just sent round a link to the disability confidence scheme, the one that Kate referred to on the government website. Which hopefully will give you some more information about the basic scheme. But I like it for three reasons, really. So firstly, because of the continuity, because the disability confidence scheme is a continuation of the 2-tick scheme. So people might be familiar with the old 2-tick scheme, which lots of employers signed up to, and you will have seen the 2-tick logo that lots of organisations have on their websites. And I liked the fact that they were building on the success of the 2-tick scheme. I think the 2-tick scheme had a very successful life, but it needed to be refreshed and it needed to be built on. And I think the disability confidence scheme does that. So I like it for that reason. I do think it has got a very strong brand as well, actually. Branding is so important these days, in all sorts of areas. And I think it's really important that whatever replaced the 2-tick scheme made a very sort of clear and very loud, if you like, statement about what we were trying to achieve. And disability confidence, I just sort of think screams, this is us, if you like, and we want to try and change things. So I really like the branding of it as well. And I really like, lastly, the fact that it's based on 3 levels that Kate has just described. And which, if you go to the link that I've just circulated to you, you'll see the different levels that and the different things that you have to achieve in order to reach those levels. And I really like the fact that that recognises that organisations are at different levels, particularly for an organisation for mine or a sector like mine that I work in, where you've got 1.3 million staff, the 5th largest employer in the world, the NHS, and over probably 500, maybe 600 organisations. Each of them are going to be at very different levels, in terms of whether it's disability or diversity generally. So I think it's a really good thing that the scheme recognises that, and it allows you to set yourself to start with at the level that you're at.
How many NHS organisations have embraced the scheme to date, do you know?
Well, I think virtually all NHS organisations signed up to the previous 2-tick scheme. So the challenge for us was not so much one of recruitment, it was about so we had to work very closely with the Department for Work and Pensions, and we have been working very closely with them to get organisations to transfer over, because there was a publicity thing. So some organisations didn't quite understand what the new scheme was and how they needed to move across. So we've been helping to do that. So we've got some background noise.
Some feedback, don't we? Louise, I want to bring you into the conversation now because I know Text Help are a disability confident employer.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your journey so far?
Yeah, so for anybody who's not familiar with Text Help, we are assistive technology providing support, particularly for individuals who have hidden disabilities and neurodiverse conditions. So for us, joining the disability confidence team was really a no-brainer. You know, the organisations that we are working with were all disability confident, and for us, it's just a very natural fit. Obviously for us, like everybody, you know, it is very much a journey, and it's experience. You know, you're starting out, you learn what the areas are. Some of the things that we've done around supporting individuals is we have a shadowing scheme where actually we work with local charities and sort of getting people giving them more experience. They're coming in, they may not have had that, so that they can put really forward with that. So, and as I say, so many of the organisations that we're working with, you know, across private and public sector. Paul mentioned the work in the NHS, local authorities, central government. We've actually just completed a big project with DWP as well. So it's very much aligned to who we're working with. So it just made great sense to be part of it.
Great, okay. And then thinking about the organisations that you work with to become more inclusive,
yeah.
Have you noticed an increase in awareness or a change in priority when it comes to supporting staff with disabilities in the workplace?
Yeah, definitely. I know, obviously, diversity and inclusion is kind of a hot topic at the minute, and a lot of the organisations that we work with, if they didn't already have diversity and inclusion teams, they are wanting to create them. And obviously with diversity and inclusion, there's so many different strands of support that you can offer, but disability support is definitely still a key one for individuals. I think organisations are seeing the benefit of having that diverse workforce. So, you know, not just having the one size fits all, having that broad range. So that's the biggest change that we have really seen in that sort of increase in diversity and inclusion and the teams that are being created around that to really push organisations forward.
Great. And Kate, just to bring you back in your experience, what seems to be the main driver behind organisations wanting to become disability confident?
There's a few that you mentioned. The first one, which is the numbers. I mean, certainly in the generation of most talent acquisition folk at the moment, they're experiencing for the first time in their career, you know, a competition for talent. People of my age, and possibly Paul creeping up on me, have been here before, but for this generation, this is a new thing. So there really is no opportunity to exclude good talent, and that's a main driver. I think the other things are, which disability confident I fundamentally believe is part of, is that we've dispelled some of those myths that it's expensive, that it's going to end up in a litigious situation, that it's going to have sickness absence days associated, all of which are in fact the complete opposite when you look at the stats and the facts. And I think the main one is that the disability confidence scheme and various other things that are happening has shown people that they now know what they don't know, which is, I think, a really good starting point. Before, there was a kind of assumption that we're nice people, we're not being discriminatory on purpose, so it'll all happen. And I think there's much more awareness now that actually it's not a big thing that you have to do, but it does require a difference in your thinking and in your approach at various stages of that talent acquisition and indeed that employment journey. And I think they're the things that I'm seeing as the drivers of people just want to be seen to be maximising their opportunity to recruit great talent. There's somebody great out there that can do a great job for them. Why would they want to miss out on that?
Sure. Okay, just a question for all of you panel then. What advice can you give to organisations then that are wanting to become more disability confident or wanting to take those first steps? What sort of recommendations would you have for them?
I think just from the work we have done, it's ask the questions, you know, speak with other organisations. You know, I think generally nobody really knows where to start in some cases. So having the conversations with some organisations, you know, as you mentioned, there's resources out there through the GWP website as well. So there's loads of resources out there that you can access. So I think it's just starting is the biggest challenge, and really going to find out that information and what you can learn from that. Cool. Any thoughts?
Well, for the NHS at the moment, so within the last year, we've introduced something called the Workforce Disability Equality Standard. So this is our attempt as a sector to try and build some of that evidence and the factual information that Kate just referred to. The way that we're doing that, or one of the ways that we're doing that, is that we're trying to encourage organisations to develop disabled staff networks within the organisations. So I would say that the first step for an organisation is to think about, and this is all linked in to the whole engagement process, you know, that we're trying to encourage organisations to be much better at engaging with their staff. So I would suggest that they should think about perhaps establishing a disabled staff network or some sort of forum where they bring people together in a safe space where they can have that conversation and ask them. They'll know what the problems and the challenges are, and they'll tell you, in my experience, very clearly and very very forthrightly as well about what they think the problems are with your organisation in terms of the, you know, it being accessible or not to disabled people. So I think that's probably a good starting point.
Yeah, you probably agree with that, Kate.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, particularly around you've got a resource in-house, which is your disabled colleagues. You may not know that because, as you've mentioned already, we have hidden disabilities, which is the majority of our disabilities are hidden. So you might want to look at how you communicate the fact that you are an environment of trust, that you want to hear from people and that you can be supportive. And our main message would be, find out what's going right, don't fix it if it's not broken, and find out where the real true barriers are and hone in on those. And the Disability Confident Resources and its partners can all support on that.
Great, yeah. So you've already shared, Paul, how organisations can sign up to the scheme. What sort of things do they need, though, to make those initial steps? Is there anything they need to prepare in advance of joining the scheme?
I think they've got to be able to show and demonstrate to their staff that they are committed to this, and that it's more than just, you know, the chief executive or the board standing up and, I don't know, signing a pledge or, you know, or waving a banner around. You know, it's got to be a lot more than that. So there's a very strong, I think, communications element to it, and it's got to be an ongoing communication as well, and an ongoing message. And I think as well, just thinking about some of the more obvious things to start with that organisations have challenges around, and some of that is around you know, the sort of imagery that they use, if you like, within their communications to their whatever type of company it is, whether it's your customers or your patients or your clients. You know, the imagery that the organisation uses to make sure that that's representative, I think, is really important. But equally, as I say, that some of the messages are very clear as well, that you know, this is an organisation that wants to attract people with disabilities and support employees with disabilities as well.
Great, okay. Any final thoughts on that before we move on to the next section?
Yeah, I think just to mention what Paul was saying about obviously the imagery and things, one of the big things we hear as well is what language do we use, you know, when we're actually speaking to people with disabilities, because nobody wants to offend anybody, but, you know, in not even having the conversation, you know, so I think it's that conversation piece. And we've heard examples of where, you know, they've changed the word from disclose to share, you know, even using that softer language. So it's not an HR procedure that you have to be part of. It's actually just a conversation, you know, so making that sort of route to just to sharing, humanizing it 100%, you know, everybody, we're all humans, you know, it's just about sharing that information that we need, just that little bit of support. So
and there is even that whole issue as well about how do you refer to this group? So I've been using the language people with disabilities. Some people don't like that, and some people do. Some people prefer disabled people or disabled staff, you know. So there's that whole thing about just being sensitive. I don't think there is a right or wrong answer actually, but it's about being sensitive to the language, as you say, Louise, and that and what we tend to do is we tend to vary it actually, and we tend to use different phrases and different terminology in different situations, and that works quite well as well for people. But you know, respecting it, and also respecting that there are distinct groups as well within that broad spectrum of disability. So you've got deaf community, you might have the blind community, you know, etc. So it's about
Great, okay, well I think we will move on to our next section then and talk a little bit more about inclusive recruitment. now that we've taken a look at the disability confidence scheme and the benefits that it brings to businesses and how easy it is really to sign up. So I'm going to start with another poll, and this is the last poll, so you may be glad to hear. How can our listeners reach a wide and diverse pool of talent when they're recruiting? What steps can they take to make their recruitment more inclusive and appeal to a wider audience? So let's get a feel for where you are on your inclusive recruitment journey. So you should see the question on your screen now. So let us know whether you've started, or maybe you've not yet started your journey. Maybe you're exploring and gathering information. Maybe you're already taking your first steps and making some adjustments, and others may have this in the bag already and are running very fully inclusive recruitment practices. So let's just see the responses. They're rolling in there still. I'll close it now, I would say. Okay, so it's quite encouraging. 12% have not yet started, but 33% are now exploring options, 26% taking our first steps, 23% making good progress, and 7%, which is lovely, said that you've got this. So you can see where the majority of people are, they've started their journey already. Kate, I'll maybe come to you first, because I know the Clear company offer inclusive training to help organisations to overcome inclusive hiring challenges. So for an example, let's say we have a vacancy in the business that we need to fill. How do we go about making sure the job spec, first off, is inclusive? What things do we need to consider at that stage?
Well, the first thing to say is it's fantastic to start at that stage, because in our experience, the majority of organisations can fall foul of, we want to increase diversity of hire, so we'll look at our attraction strategy. Whereas actually in our experience, as you rightly say, the barriers tend to lie at that development of the proposition and also then through the process and beyond. So in the development of the proposition, it's really important to have a really good look at that role, and we do it in quite a structured way. So we say to an organisation, don't leap in with the, I'll have another Paul. I mean, one's enough for us, isn't it? We've got Paul Deemer, one's enough on this. But that is what an organisation can do. In essence, it goes straight for the person specification. So the discipline is, let's identify what that role needs to deliver. Let's make it outcome focused, so we're not going to dictate how it's done. We just want to make it happen. And we need to look at the language and tone. So we avoid any physical language around agility, which is really common at the moment. Fast-paced, agile, all of those terms can create an illusion of an organisation that somebody with a disability or a health condition may self-select out of. So that's really key. Get that absolutely tight, no more than 8 to 10 points. Make those hiring managers work. And distill them down into the absolute key deliverables. We're not having any wish lists because they introduce barriers. And then we directly link anything that we need from the candidate back to those deliverables. If we can't link them back, they don't go in. And that's the safest way to create an inclusive job description. And if you don't get that right with that rigour, and it can feel, if you're not used to that discipline as an organisation. We work with a lot of organisations who didn't have any job descriptions when we started, and they now put this structure in. It can feel over irksome at the beginning of the process if you're in a hurry and your manager's going how quickly and how many people. But what it does do is it absolutely increases the diversity of hire, because it means that you can only get that job if you're good enough to do it, because we've not put anything in that creates that adverse impact for people that know the role already, or know somebody in role, or whose education or social mobility status would influence it. But more importantly, I think for selling it internally is it greatly increases your hire first time. Because when you come to the end of the process, you've agreed your criteria, you're confident of it, it's structured and you've articulated it well, and therefore you can make a hiring decision collectively. So I run one day full workshops on this topic. It's my absolute soapbox, because if we don't get this right, whatever sophistication you put in the rest of it, you've started with a fundamentally flawed brief. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think so. Thinking about advertising the job then, where do we go to find a wider talent pool, and attract a more diverse audience to your business?
So that's another interesting one, and there's a lot of research around it. So first of all, so if I'm a finance director with a disability, or I'm a finance director from a minority ethnic background, I'm still going to look at financial agencies and the Financial Times and the top headhunters for my next role, I'm not going to look in the BAME-specific media that I might use as my coffee table media or to inform my community. On the other hand, however, brand awareness, as Paul's already said about the Disability Confident brand is really important in recruitment, and it's something that was overlooked for many years. But our employee proposition and our employer brand are absolutely key, and those we can get out around specialist press and different environments. For me, it's if you're going to use agencies, make sure that they are diversity confident, and you've set absolute KPIs and you measure them. And you'll probably have to educate them, which is what Paul and I are doing with another group of people to work on. So agencies, don't assume they know it. They will want to know it, but they don't necessarily know it. Some do, and we can advise you on those. If you're going to advertise, it's about what you say as much as where you put it. But you also need to make sure that you're not inadvertently going on a jobs board that's inaccessible or has inappropriate imagery. So there's some specialist jobs boards such as Visida and Even Break are ones that we would recommend, which we know are fully accessible and we know have that diversity reach. And also with your networking. So if you network amongst your existing networks and you don't extend those, then if networking and profile building is part of your employee proposition, you're not going to increase diversity of hire by doing that. And there's some really basic stuff. We did a review once where for call centre recruitment, all of the hires were white young graduates from Redbrook universities. And they all left within 3 months. So they were trained expensively and then they all left. They were brilliant, but they all left. And when you looked at how and where those were being advertised, the training programme was punitive if you had any caring responsibilities whatsoever. And you had to have go through all sorts of academic tests such as verbal reasoning and numeric reasoning, and all sorts of different assessment processes, whereas actually there was a full training programme. So take out the training programme, alter the shifts, offer it flexibly, and you totally change the genre of hire. So it's not where you hire as much as what you, it's not where you advertise as much as what you advertise. The two have to go in tandem.
And just thinking about reasonable adjustments then, you know, what reasonable adjustments should we prepare to offer candidates, and at what stage do we offer them?
Okay, so this is another bandwagon. Because all of our research historically has said that employers feel comfortable if they put on their websites or on their job applications, if you need an adjustment, please let us know. And that's nowhere near enough. What we have to do is make sure that at every single stage of the recruitment process, we provide the opportunity for candidates to share with us their life circumstances and, really important word here, the impact of those life circumstances on their ability to show us how good they are through our recruitment processes. And therefore, if there's anything we can do to reduce that impact, that's what the adjustment needs to be. And for many candidates, less than 13% in our last survey feel confident enough to do that at the beginning of a process. But if you keep saying it and you use language and you say, we do this all the time, for example, here's a case study from so-and-so, we provided an alternative format for, here's so-and-so who we interviewed outside of busy times because they get stressed in commuter traffic, it gives people the confidence to share. So in terms of stages, every stage, keep doing it. And keep asking. We don't need to know the nature of the disability. That's not for us to know in recruitment. But what we do need to know is the impact of it, because what we want to do is make sure that if somebody's great, we've not put something in our process that means we can't see it. And in terms of what's reasonable, the first thing about reasonableness is that it needs to work. So it needs to address the issue. And obviously the best source of information for that is usually the candidate themselves. And I like this line which came from a lawyer friend of ours, which says reasonable adjustment should be limited only by your imagination. So whether it's a thicker pen for somebody with arthritis, whether it's adjusting the lighting in the room, whether it's having somebody that they know waiting in reception so they're a bit calmer when they get to the interview, it's all those small little things. Think outside the box. We had a case study at Riddy. I will stop in a moment. We had a case study at Riddy, Recruitment Industry Disability Initiative, and they won an award, because the recruiter got a phone call from somebody who was a wheelchair user on the way to the interview, and their route was blocked by roadworks and they were panicking. And the recruiter, the adjustment was the recruiter ran out of their office, jumped into the car, directed them around and got them into the building. That was the adjustment that was required to get a calm, collected candidate who could perform well, and they got the job, by the way. So I hope that answers the question. You know, just keep thinking outside the box.
think it does. Paul, just coming to you, thinking about bias. Often bias is unconscious, it's unintentional. How would you recommend that we remove bias from our shortlisting and selection process?
Well, if I had the answer to that, I'd be a very rich person. I think what we can do is, again, we just have to start at the very basic level in terms of, I think, good practice to start with around. So my profession is from human resources, so that's my background, and that's what I've done for 30 odd years, human resources. And I think what I've seen over that time and at the moment is that organisations, I say organisations generally, I think, have got a bit lax around recruitment and a bit blasé, if you like, about recruitment. Everybody thinks they know how to recruit and they know how to interview and they know how to shortlist. And I remember, I'm not going to play the old, back in the day card, but I think there is something about, Kate's talked about, the value of job descriptions and stuff like that, and I think that's really important. So I think there's something about just reminding ourselves that, the job description that you send out, that people don't realise that's what the person looks at, and they'll read into that a whole load of things. So you have to think carefully about what that job description says and what it's looking for. And then when you get to the shortlisting stage, I think there's a process there to go through in terms of just checking and balancing your decisions. Yeah, so making sure that there isn't just one person, for example, who does the shortlisting and then just sort of sends a list across to someone and says, "Oh, you're happy with these?" And people are so busy these days, they'll just say yes. But more importantly, probably at the interview stage as well, I think there is a lot to be said for making panels representative. And I know that's a challenge because we're trying to do that across the whole diversity piece. So you can't have a panel of 3 or 4 people that's going to represent everything within society. But, if you are genuinely committed to increasing the number of people with disabilities within your organisation, I would suggest that you should try and make your panels reflective of that in various ways. And, making sure that, that whole process is an inclusive one as well. And I think, just in those ways, by actively addressing those things and demonstrating those things, I think that starts to it starts to get people to think about their bias. Yeah, because there is a science and a sort of philosophy these days which says that you can change the way that you think, but you just need to change it by doing things in a different way. Yeah.
Be consciously aware of what you're doing. Louise, just to bring you in, what benefits are organisations missing out on by not having inclusive recruitment practices?
Well, one of the big things we really look at and test is the power of a neurodiverse talent pool. So we talk about people with neurodiverse conditions that can range from dyslexia, autism, Asperger's, cognitive processing conditions. It's kind of the blanket term, but for those individuals with these various conditions, that they have a wealth of talent and skills that can really enhance any organisation. You're looking at creative thinkers, thinking outside the box, problem solving. If you have 10 people in the room and all those 10 people think exactly the same way because that's the way your job description, advertised that role, you're not really going to get those new ideas, those, when you come up against problems, how do we work around this? So having that diverse team really is a benefit to you. And for some individuals, they may need that little bit of support in that role. That's fine. There's solutions out there which can help individuals. So I think really having that breadth of neurodiversity really is a big thing. And we've talked about it as a hidden disability for so long, and there are individuals who do still find that they want to hide it from their employers because they don't want to be given that tag, if you like. However, in some organisations, there's people who wear it like a badge of honour, and they want to shout and want to talk about it. So I think it's really important to make sure you have those individuals who want to shout and who want to bring their experience and their kind of skill set forward.
Bring the voice. Great, okay. And just mentioning Belfast Health and Social Care Trust, because I know you work alongside them to help make their recruitment more inclusive. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the initiatives that they've introduced?
Yeah, so they've done a lot of quite cool things. So they've started doing sort of recruitment days and induction days where they're actually getting people or getting in front of people and talking about what they're doing to support individuals already. So not just kind of on the first day saying, what do you need from us? You know, they're kind of bringing people in and saying, look, this is what we're already offering. Is this something you need? Is there something else we can bring along? So again, it's that engaging people in the conversation again and not just going, here's a list of what we do, you have to pick from that. So really engaging in those conversations as well. I mean, Belfast Trust is just one of the organisations we've worked with around that inclusive recruitment piece. We've done a lot with the police service, actually across the UK are really buying into this at the minute, particularly around the recruitment piece and getting police cadets into the training colleges. So traditionally, you would have found people were coming through police careers, not necessarily from an academic background. You know, they would have been sort of starting as a PC because they want to help, they want to be part of that community, but they don't necessarily have that academic background. However, if you're giving them large pieces of law content essentially to learn, that can be a challenge for them. So what one police force had done was actually provided an assistive technology in the training college. And they were actually able to jump their retention at the training college. They had about a 50% drop off of recruits staying on through the college. So by just providing one support tool to help them get through their training, they were then confident in their role, which they could then take that support to enhance their own role even further. So loads of different examples of where it's working in practice.
Great, okay. And Paul, you know, we've heard from Louise about Belfast Trust and how they're making their recruitment more accessible. Do you have any other best practice examples from other organisations that you've worked with?
Lots and lots. Lots and lots. And actually there is a guide that we've put together recently around recruiting and supporting disabled staff specifically. So NHS Employers, colleagues of mine, actually it wasn't my own team, have produced a toolkit around this, which I'm just clicking on now, and I will shortly circulate on Twitter. Can I be very selfish for a moment and just give a shout out to some people on Twitter?
Go for it.
So Portsmouth Chronic Fatigue Syndrome Service have just followed me, which is nice. So you must be watching, I know that. And there was also Manuela, I think, has joined as well from Avenade is the organisation, and Sharon Womer and Moran Burrows as well from the RSA, D&I lead at RSA. So thank you for joining us. So I'll circulate this link to this document that we've produced, this toolkit about recruiting and supporting disabled staff in the NHS, and it just goes through some of the things I think that Louise talked about that organisations are doing already, and there are some very good examples in there as well and some good practice. But it's for me, it's again slightly repeating what I said earlier, but it's about thinking about the systems and the process. So thinking about the systems that you've got in place for recruitment, how you do things. But then thinking about when you actually get to those points, the actual way that you do those things as well, I think is really important. So and I think that's what the toolkit talks about as well. It just tries to encourage you to look again at what you're doing and why you're doing it. So, and the reason I say that is because in the NHS about 5 years ago, we had a bit of a jolt because there was an issue identified about the numbers of Black and Asian and minority ethnic staff within the NHS, and that caused us to introduce again another standard which encouraged organisations to look at their processes around this. And obviously the recruitment process was a big aspect of this, and the reason we did that was because whilst there was a very good representation of BME staff across the NHS, that tended to lessen as you went up the organisation. So we had this pyramid effect that happened. So there were much less BAME staff at the top of the organisations than there was at the bottom, and that caused them to look at their shortlisting. So we put in a metric which asked organisations to look at the appointment rates between shortlisting and appointment of BME staff. And that found that white staff were almost 1.5 times more likely to be appointed than BAME staff across the NHS. So, you know, Kate said it earlier, and it's so true. You need to look at the data, and that will give you an evidence base then, I think, to make some changes. And this is about making changes. It's about doing things differently. So there, you know, there's this sort of there's this whole thing about, you know, if you carry on doing things the same way, you're going to get the same results. Yeah. And that's what I think the race equality standard has taught us, and certainly the disability standard has taught us as well. So we need to, as Kate was saying earlier, think outside the box, think more creatively, think more innovatively, and there is a strong evidence base for doing that.
Great, okay. I think maybe just to round up this section, and Kate, we'll maybe come to you first. What would you think is the most important part of the recruitment process that organisations really must get right?
Oh, the most important one, the starting point, has got to be your job description, but I'm going to add in a second, which is manager capability. They're the two areas in all of our audits where we find there's a gap. It's an assumed competence to interview, it's an assumed competence to interview inclusively. So that is worth investment and examination, but based on strong foundations with a great job description.
Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, sometimes there's so much going on, and I think it is just sort of really trying to think what it is that is the most important thing for you
For that
moving
role.
forward.
Yeah, grand. Okay, well, I think we'll move on. I'm just conscious of time, about retaining a diverse workforce. So we'll move on to the next section. So we'll delve a little bit deeper into how best to support diverse talent once they've actually been attracted into the business, how we can ensure that individual needs are supported in the role, you know, how we can create an environment that really encourages staff to, you know, raise their hands and request that additional support as needed. So Paul, I'll maybe come to you first this time, because the NHS is a huge organisation and so diverse. I mean, just looking at some of the stats recently, I read that 1 in 8 NHS employees are foreign nationals. That's 12.5% of the workforce. And among doctors, the number is even higher, with over 26% of doctors from overseas. You know, how are NHS organisations supporting such diversity? You're thinking about the cultural difference as well as the obvious language challenges that would exist.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's a huge challenge for us for all sorts of reasons, and you know, we now, as everybody will be aware, have got the additional challenge of the coronavirus that's spreading across the country, and that's just highlighting the importance of supporting staff in the right way, on a day-to-day basis. So, but broadly within the diversity and inclusion world, there is a sort of a new language, if you like, I think, that's coming into the world of equality, diversity and inclusion, and people are starting to use this term belonging, which I think is a nice phrase. I'm always a bit skeptical often about language, and there is a school of thought that says, you know, is it just being politically correct? Are we just trying to use nice language? But I think that's an important term, because I think it takes that whole idea of cultural change and supporting staff to a different level. So I think, you know, whether it's an issue about age, and in terms of, you know, welcoming younger people, but also older people back into the workforce as well, disability and making workforces more accessible, gender and sexual orientation. I think there's a whole issue about visibility and the voice of particular groups, you know, whether it's lesbian, gay, bisexual or trans groups. But when it comes to ethnicity, and you mentioned the statistics around, you know, the cultural mix within the NHS, you know, there is something about making organisations what we call culturally intelligent. So being, you know, respectful, I think, of those differences within the organisation. But at the end of the day, it's all about creating a good place to work, and that's the essence of what we're trying to do, certainly within the NHS. And I know lots of organisations, that's their ambition. It's about creating a place where people want to come to work. And they want to work, and they have some commitment to work, and it goes back to a very basic concept, I think, of that psychological contract, you know, between employer and employee, which I think is so important.
Yeah. Okay. You know, what advice have you given then to NHS organisations to really better support their diverse workforce? What recommendations or?
I would say look around you and look at others. You know, there are some fantastic examples of what organisations have done and what they're doing. And the one lesson that we've learned from a lot of those is the importance of leadership. And I say this a lot, and I'll say it again because it just really is just so important. So there are, within the NHS, there are some fantastic chief executives. You know, Jackie Daniels, for example, at Newcastle Hospitals up in the northeast. We've got a chief executive, Aaron Cummins, who is chief executive at Morecambe Bay Hospital in the northwest. We've got Angela Hillary, who manages a huge trust in the Midlands, Northamptonshire Healthcare Trust. And they got credited recently by the Care Quality Commission for the work that they've done around equality, diversity and inclusion as part of their inspection, which is quite rare actually. So they're doing some really good stuff. So, and that leadership piece is just so important because it just puts the issue on the agenda naturally, you know, because these people talk about it at all the sort of meetings that we go to, and it's embedded through the whole organisation.
Okay, I'm just conscious of the time, but Kate, maybe if we could come to you and maybe ask, you know, why do you think organisations struggle to retain the very talent that they've spent time and money recruiting in the first place?
So there's different reasons for different people, I think, and different contexts. I know certainly one of the current theories around retaining our Black and minority ethnic colleagues at a senior level is that there's statistically, it would appear that they're more likely to achieve promotion by leaving their current organisation and getting promotion elsewhere. And we're doing some tracking around that with a couple of our client organisations in terms of why that might be. I think people need to see, and we all do, don't we? We all need to see where we're going to get to. So if we're ambitious and or we want to stay and have loyalty, we need to see people around us who've achieved either of those things, who are like us, so that we can see it's feasible. So I think that's really important. So I agree with everything that Paul said around leadership. We've a huge pendulum swing in terms of delivering inclusive leadership programs now at the Clear Company. It's huge, and this next year is showing mobilising the middle. So that's all about the middle manager. So I think what people are finding is you've got, you know, your strategies and your policies, you've got some great initiatives running. You may or may not have really good empowered leadership that's setting the right leadership shadow for you. But what we very often find is that middle management level haven't quite got it right and haven't got the tools and resources to manage inclusively. And that's where we're seeing increasing investment now, so we don't disenfranchise our colleagues.
Okay, great. Louise, just to come to you, you know, what programs have you experienced with the organisations that you've worked with? I mean, are there any greatest learnings or anything, you know, really exciting that you've experienced relating to D&I?
Yeah, well, I think it was sort of touched on earlier about one of the big initiatives that we keep seeing is these disability champions in workplaces, and even going beyond that, having those kind of really specific networks. So one that we come across quite a lot is dyslexia networks in organisations. So for individuals with dyslexia, they are involved in shaping the policy, shaping the support, being the go-to people. And I think, just going to what Kate said, it's having that visibility of people around you, you know, going through the same experiences. You have allies essentially in the workplace that you can rely on. I think, you know, we talked about obviously the inclusive recruitment piece, and I think actually sometimes one of the big challenges now is keeping staff in organisations. You know, it's kind of an employer's market at the minute. There's so many different organisations who are offering, you know, different benefits, different support. So if an employer's not getting the support, or sorry, an employee's not getting the support they need in an organisation, they're in the position they can go somewhere else. There's other opportunities available for them now. So for your organisation, your brand awareness, you know, you really want to be seen to be supporting everybody in the organisation, you know, not just a few. And really, that's where you start, by creating that inclusive environment. And I know certainly in terms of what we've created, we have a neurodiversity guide which can give sort of hints and tips of certain groups that to support and areas in which you can do. So, you know, we'll be happy to share that as well after. So I think, yeah, it's continuing those kind of ideas, initiatives, and making it a place where people want to work and want to go in every day and want to make a difference and make a change.
Great, okay. We have 5 minutes left. So on the slide deck, you will see there's results from our recent diversity and inclusion survey. We don't have time right now to talk through everything, but the results are there for everyone to see. I mean, personally, I do feel quite encouraged by the results, although you haven't been able to see them just yet. But the majority of respondents have buy-in from their senior teams. So some of the things we've been talking about already. The majority of our listeners and the people that responded to the survey have appointed a D&I leader, which is great. Most have started their journey, which is great, to supporting people with disabilities in work, and starting is often the hardest part. The biggest hurdle seems to be time and resources, but hopefully with the awareness campaigns such as this webinar, organisations will start to realise the great benefits of investing in D&I, what it brings. So just before we go to questions from our listeners, are there any final thoughts from the panel on anything that we've sort of talked about today?
I think there's been lots of sort of key things that we've talked about. I think, as I say, just starting the journey and trying to make that change really is the key thing. You know, don't worry if you think, oh, I don't want to start something because it might go wrong. You know, you learn from that, move on, try new things. As I said, there's loads of resources out there and loads of networks, even looking on kind of the likes of your social media, your LinkedIn and your Twitter. There's loads of conversations going on. So even looking at there may be things to learn. So yeah, I think just starting really the journey is the big thing.
Yeah, well, I think that, so when I came into the world of diversity, which was probably about 15 years ago, there was, all I heard all the time was, what's the business case? What's the business case? But the thing that I'm getting to now, and the thing that I say more and more to people, is diversity and inclusion is the business case.
Yeah.
You don't need a business case for it. It is the business case. We've got a generation of people coming into organizations now who value ethics and diversity above anything else. You know, they want to work for organizations that are that understand things like climate change and things like diversity and ethics and values, and we push values all the time with our organizations, and we know that that's just so important as a recruitment tool and as a retention tool as well.
Any final thoughts from yourself, Kate?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I always say to organisations is that, you know, in any other aspect of HR or business, you have a strategy and you set yourselves goals that's linked to your overall business aims, and this should be no different. So try and avoid the temptation to do, you know, odd initiatives, and actually engage with your business, you know, at the front line at every level by asking what's important to them. Where's their pain? Where's their gain? And how can we, therefore, as an inclusive employer, put it as business as usual to deliver to that by creating that sense of belonging that Paul identified earlier. That's the thing to me. It so often gets pocketed as something separate. It's a business imperative, and that's how it should be. That's how it should be reviewed.
Great. Okay. So I've had a quick look at the questions actually that have come in from the listeners, and I feel that we've answered them already from the talks that we've had. So I think that actually brings us to a close. So I hope you find the session useful, and you can take some of the practical advice into your own organisation to enhance your D&I inclusion strategy. Special thanks to our panellists, Paul Deemer, Kate Headley and Louise McQuillan, for sharing their knowledge and vast experience on this topic. Their contact details are on the screen now if you'd like to reach out to any of them directly. On the screen, that is not what Kate actually looks like because we couldn't update the slides quick enough, but that is her email address, so you know, you can certainly reach out. Also, if you haven't done so already, I really do invite you to join TextHelp's 5,000+ strong community of D&I and HR professionals, where you'll hear how other organisations are building diversity and inclusion into their workplace, and you'll receive some useful resources that Louise has already referenced. We've got a neurodiversity guide, we've got a guide on building disability confidence in the workplace. So the link is on the slide as well. You'll also get an email early next week, hopefully, with a recording from today's session, and you'll get the opportunity to sign up for our next webinar, which is on the 3rd of June. And our focus then is on retention. There'll be some practical advice from our panel on how best to support staff with diverse needs so they flourish and stay motivated within your organisation. So The speakers we have lined up are from ACAS, the independent advisory body to improve workplace relations. We've got the Met Police and Diversity Scotland. So don't miss out, secure your place early, and thanks for listening everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.